Hello and welcome back to Dual Charge Gaming, part 3 of the video tutorial on how to create multi-bases for Kings of War. And in this tutorial I'll be explaining how I paint the rock effects and how I create the snow effects for the multi-bases. But as you can see, I have already applied the snow and I will go through how I achieve that later in this video, but to begin with I just wanted to go through the paints that I use for the rock effects. First of all, I based the rocks with this, the Vallejo Black Brown. If you haven't got this, you could use the Games Workshop Scorch Brown, or just mix together black and brown, 2 parts brown, 1 part black. And secondly, I used the Vallejo Field Grey. Now I like this colour because it's quite a nice earthy grey and it's got a bit of a tint of green to it, which I think works well for the rock effects. Thirdly, I washed the entire area with the Army Painter Strong Tone, but if you haven't got this, any dark brown wash will do. And after the wash is dried, I apply another layer of the Field Grey, and then following that I mix white with the Field Grey, using the same stroke effect that I used for the ice in the previous video. So now that's the paints covered, I can just crack on with the base layer. Okay, so that's the base layer complete. It's now time to start adding the Field Grey. I haven't waited for this to dry, but you can do if you like. I'm a little bit impatient, but I do find as well that you get a better transition of colours when the paint's still a little bit wet. And as I said, I apply the Field Grey using the same method that I used with the ice. If you haven't seen that video, you can check out the link here. But basically it's thin to thick strokes, thick point closest to the light source to thinnest point furthest away from the light source. So I just start applying that now. Okay, so that's the highlights applied to both rock areas. It's now time to add 50% Field Grey, 50% whites for the second layer of highlights. And as you can see here, I've left a gap on each of the rock edges just to highlight the impact of the light source. And I'll do the same now with the second layer of highlights, not going as far to the edge, or which is furthest away from the light source. Okay, so now the layering's finished, it's just now time for some finishing touches. All I do here is apply a couple of layers of dry brush. The first layer is with the Citadel Underhive Ash paint. Again, I like this paint because of the slight green tint to it, which is great for that aged rock effect. And all I do is apply a generous amount to a GW tank brush and apply the strokes going across the light source strokes applied in the previous layers. Okay, so all I do now to finish off is just apply a layer of dry brushing using the Citadel's Terminus Stone dry brush paint just to the edges of all of the rocks. Okay, so now the rocks are finished, I can now go through the method that I use for the snow effect. Now you will need a mixing palette of some sort for this. I personally just use a takeaway lid because that's what I had spare. The materials that I use for this are the generic static snow. You can get this from most hobby shops, but I believe I got this from eBay. And also PVA glue, which you'll need to mix with the static snow on the pallets, and also a bit of water that you'll need to mix in as well. Now the ratios that you want to use for this may vary depending on the diorama that you're creating, but generally I prefer to use quite a wet mix because I find it's easier to apply it to the multi-base. Generally, but not always, I use about 50 to 60% snow, then I add about 30% PVA glue, and then just a little bit of water after that and mix it together. If I find that the mix is quite dry, then I add a little bit more water or glue. But be aware that if you add too much water, then it may affect the drying process and the snow may not sit correctly on the multi-base. But also be aware if you add too much PVA glue, then you may find that the snow doesn't cure properly when it's dried. It may be a bit translucent, so you just got to be wary of that. Maybe try it out on just a spare piece of MDF or plastic you've got spare, and just try different ratios, whatever you feel comfortable with. Once you've got a ratio that you feel works for you, then just apply that to the multi-base. Now when applying this mix, please use an old brush, one you don't care too much about because this will damage the bristles obviously. Now when applying the mix, just consider all of the places that the snow would dry last or where it would rest, such as up against the base of the trunks, in the recesses of each layer of the rocks, and on top of each of the tree trunks. Okay, so I just started in the snow. And there you have it, one completed Knight Regiment multi-base ready for the models to be added. And in case you were wondering, I use all-purpose glue to stick the miniatures to the base. I found that super glue absorbs into the snow and the cork a bit too much and the models break off too easily, but with all-purpose glue, once it's fully cured, it does hold the models in place. And also just to show you, the same effect can be applied to other multi-bases, like this horde of infantry here. Okay, as always, please feel free to comment with any questions you might have, and if you have any requests as well, please feel free to ask. And if you found this video helpful, please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.